Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says getting ahead of constitutional practices. There are two issues involved in this article. One is speaking about the anti-defection law, the other is speaking about the discretionary powers of the governor. The first issue covers about anti-defection law. This is in specific reference to what is happening in Rajasthan right now. This has been explained on 25th of July 2020 under the second topic judicial indiscipline, anti-defection law, Kyoto Holohan case at 11 minutes 31 seconds. Kindly look into it. What is the focus of this discussion? The focus that we are going to put about is in reference to the governor's discretionary power. What exactly is the whole context? Congress legislators backing Rajasthan Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot asked the governor to call for a special assembly session. Why? Because they wanted to show their strength on the floor of the house. They requested the governor, they asked the governor, dear governor, please summon the house on a date that we the cabinet have decided. But the governor does not listen to the cabinet. The governor asks the government to change the date of the commencement recommended by the cabinet. Now the question is, does the governor have this discretionary power? Is the governor bound by the advice of the chief minister who is heading the council of ministers when it comes to convening the assembly session, and to what extent does the governor have the discretion in actually moving this particular date as requested by the cabinet? This is what is this article all about. We have what is called as the parliamentary system of democracy. We have the center, which has the parliament at the central level. We also have the state, which also has the state assemblies. So what is applicable to the central government, the same will be applied at the state level as well. Let's understand how is the procedure of summoning at the central level. What we have in this particular procedure is the cabinet. The cabinet is headed by the prime minister. They enter into a consensus as to what date that the parliament will have to be summoned. So they decide on a particular date and they reveal the same information to the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs. Why Parliamentary Affairs? Because it is that wing of the government of India which basically deals with the government business in both the houses of the parliament. So they decide on a date and then the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs will immediately write to the speaker, inquires whether the speaker is available on that day which the cabinet and the prime minister has decided. So the speaker is asked by the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs and the speaker will give consent to it. The speaker will say yes, he is available, or he might also say that he might not be available as well. In case the speaker says that he is available, then the same is forwarded to the Secretary General of the Lok Sabha. The Secretary General of the Lok Sabha then sends the file to the office of the President along with the office note indicating agreement to this particular date. So then it is sent to the president's office, and from the president's office it goes to the president, where the president gives his assent or the president's signature on the summons order. So this signature will be given by the president on the very same day, or it can maximum be delayed by a day or two. And after this is done, the Secretary General therefore then sends the individual summons to the members, which includes the president's order, and this is authenticated by the Secretary General as well. This is the general procedure how it is followed in the parliament, that is at the central level. A similar procedure is followed at the state level as well. What happens? The cabinet, which is headed by the chief minister, decides on a particular date. This is ultimately sent to the governor of that state. The governor has to give his assent for the summons order within a day or two, and this will ultimately go to the assembly, who will also send individual summons at the state level. This is the general procedure. Now let's look at the constitutional angle. Why is the constitutional angle important? To understand whether the governor has the discretion to actually sign this particular summon, or he can postpone this particular summon order. Let's look into the constitutional angle. We have Article 163 of the Constitution of India. It says the Council of Ministers will aid and advise the governor. there shall be a council of ministers with the chief minister at the head to aid and advise the governor in exercise of his functions. Then we have another article, Article 174 of the Indian Constitution. It speaks about sessions of the state legislature, prorogation and dissolution. Clause 1 says the governor shall from time to time summon to the house or each house of the legislature of the state to meet at such time and place as he thinks fit. These two articles will have to be read together for the harmonious construction of understanding the power of the chief minister who heads the council of ministers and the governor. Article 163 clearly says that the governor will have to listen to the advice of the council of ministers. Article 174 speaks about summoning. So when you have the chief minister who is heading the council of ministers who clearly writes a letter for a decision to summon the assembly, it means that the governor will have to listen to it. The governor is constitutionally mandated to follow this particular order and also implement it. In fact, the cabinet is not even bound to state the agenda for the session to the governor, but the governor is constitutionally mandated to listen to the chief minister and summon the house in this particular situation. The Supreme Court also holds a similar view. There was a landmark judgment that came in the year 2016 in Nabam Rabia and Baman Felix versus the Deputy Speaker, and this happened in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. The Supreme Court reaffirmed this very stand that the governor can summon or prorogue or dissolve the house only on the aid and advice of the council of ministers with the chief minister as the head and not on his own. So the governor does not have any discretion here, and that has been substantiated by the Supreme Court under this particular judgment. What if the governor does not sign the summons? This again was clarified in Shamsher Singh versus the state of Punjab in the year 1974. The Supreme Court clearly said that the governor has no right to refuse to act on the advice of the Council of Ministers, and such a position is antithetical to the concept of responsible government. So he has no mandate to reject this very proposal, and he has to listen to the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, which is headed by the Chief Minister. When the government loses the majority, it is only then that the governor would be able to have the discretion. Now you might ask me a question, what has happened in the present scenario? In the present scenario, the legislators who were the rebel camp have clearly said in front of the Rajasthan High Court that they had certain issues, certain dissents within the Congress party, but they support the Congress party and they were ready to comply by the rules of the Congress party. So they had the majority. So when they have the majority, the governor has to simply listen to the chief minister who is heading the council of ministers. Only when there is no majority is when the governor would be able to exercise the powers vested within him under 174 on his own without any aid and advice. But if they have the majority, he has to comply by the rules, and the rule says that he has to listen to the chief minister who heads the council of ministers. We also have one of the important report called as Justice Sarkaria Commission report, and the same was also reiterated by the Punchi Commission. What did this report say? It says that as long as the council of ministers enjoy the confidence of the house, where all the legislators are backing the chief minister, then the governor will have to listen to the council of ministers and to the chief minister. So this is binding on the governor on the subject of summoning, proroguing or dissolving the house or the houses of the state legislature. So he does not have any individual discretion when it comes to summoning, is what this article all about. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. But kindly remember, with respect to the anti-defection law, we have an elaborate analysis on 25th July 2020. Now let's look into the next article. This article here is speaking about the national education policy. We have had an elaborate analysis of what is this national education policy, what are the structural changes it is planning to bring at the school level and also at the higher education level. We also looked at what are the significant aspects, what are the major transformations the government is planning to come up with. In this particular article, what we would focus is on some of the challenges for the implementation of this national education policy. The significant aspects have been dealt with in our yesterday's CNA, so kindly look into it. but what we are going to focus is on concerns and the challenges with respect to its implementation. First up, we have what is called as the concurrent list. According to that concurrent list, we have education which is placed in the concurrent subject, which means the central government would be able to make laws with respect to that particular list, and at the same time we also have the state government which can also make laws with respect to the subject that is present in the concurrent list. Since education is a concurrent subject, both the center and the state can make laws on it. The reforms proposed by the central government can be implemented, can be appreciated only when they have the consensus from the state government. Yes, the central government has come up with something great, but this will also have to be in concurrence with the state government as well. Only when the state government is also becoming the implementation body, where the state government is taken into consideration by the central government, that is when there is an ambitious plan which will turn into reality, is one of the immediate challenges. The idea of the National Higher Education Council can also be opposed by the state governments. What is the whole issue? Yesterday we did discuss that there would be something called as the Higher Education Commission of India. What is this Higher Education Commission of India? Currently we have multiple forces. We have the UGC, we also have the AICTE. This will be replaced with what is called as Higher Education Commission of India. Under this Higher Education Commission of India, there is one of the regulatory independent bodies called as the National Higher Education Regulatory Council. So what will it do? This will basically ensure that there is regulation on the all India level. Now the question is, if this is completely controlled by the central government, why will the state governments comply by the rules is one set of argument. So the key issue is that the state governments will also have to be taken into consideration when it comes to the regulation is another simple argument. Central government has come up with the national education policy after 34 long years. The last national education policy was drafted in the year 1986. Now the question is, how will this program be implemented? How will the government break the shackles from the older education system, that which is prevalent currently? The implementational protocols, how will it be implemented? How will the funding come up? All these are the questions and challenges when it comes to the implementation. We currently have the compartmentalization of what is called as government schools, where the government is heading this particular management, and we also have the private schools where you have individuals heading that particular organization. Now the question is, the policy does not talk about how to improve the government schools, but it encourages more of the private ones. If it is encouraging the private ones, where the major reforms are going to happen, the poor section, the poor people, people from the rural sector will not be able to afford, and ultimately education is going to be the one which is serving only the rich people. Moreover, we also have the fee regulations which the government is planning to come up with. There would be a cap as well. But another important pointer is, majority of the state governments already have the fee regulations, but the problem is something which is happening behind the curtains, and that is in the form of donations. In case the central government is planning to put a cap on the fee, they will also have to look beyond the fee and also look at the donation aspect as well. The government in the present scenario has said that this particular program will be implemented by the year 2040. So this will require huge amount of money, and the government has promised that it will infuse about 6% of the GDP into the educational transformation. Previously, similar such promises were also made in 1968 and also in 1986. So will this happen similar in the present scenario is another challenge that we have to wait and watch. Moreover, the government is also planning to introduce occasional courses in the school education, where students from 6th to 8th will have what is called as bagless days, which means they will also focus on other important skills like carpentry, like painting, so on and so forth. Are Indian parents ready to accept this is another question, because most of the Indian parents have already decided what is the student's life, what is the engineering field that they are picking, or what is the stream that they are opting. One such example on a lighter note is the movie of Three Idiots as well. So when parents decide, what we also require is awareness and awakening the conscience of the parents, so that the students are given their liberty to select the streams that they want in the near future and opt their career options. These are some of the challenges with respect to the implementation of the new national education policy. So what is the way forward? The government has clearly said that intelligence of the students should not be tested on the basis of the examination. So what has it done? It has said there will be less stressful examination, but it has for sure said that 10th standard examination and 12th standard board examinations will continue. So instead of this, where we have examinations, what we can also have is a continuous assessment model. Instead of one person studying for the entire year, writing the examination, why not assess the personality of that student over a period of 1 year instead of having one whole year as an assessment model? So this is one of the alternative strategies as well. Apart from this, we currently have what is called as the midday meal scheme program. So this midday meal scheme program is provided to the students afternoon once every single day. Why not also attract the students so that the number of students who are increasing taking the education is increased by also giving them breakfast, which is also an energy booster. This is also another suggestion that the government can also consider. We also discussed yesterday that we have something called as the gender inclusion fund. This gender inclusion fund is basically attracting the girls and women so that they are educated, and at the same time we can also have what is called as inclusion fund, where all those people who are economically backward, who do not have enough money to study, such people can also be accommodated with this inclusion fund. And finally, to bring all this into perspective so that the students take advantages of the present education system, their communication becomes very important. So paying heed on their communication, paying extra attention to other overall development of the students becomes very important, is what this article all about. But for the rest of the analysis, kindly look into our yesterday's CNA, where we have a clear-cut analysis of what this education policy is all about. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, not the right time to open gyms. The Ministry of Home Affairs had issued guidelines as part of Unlock 3.0. According to these guidelines, it has shut all the activities that, in reference to the cinema halls, bars, auditorium and assembly halls as well. But one thing that the government has opened is yoga institutes as well as gymnasiums. And this gymnasiums and yoga centers will not be able to open in the containment zones. There is an exception as well. Now the question is it the right decision? Why? Because we have as many as 1.6 million cases. And when we look into the newspaper, these cases are increasing every single day. So is it the right decision for the yoga institutes as well as the gymnasiums to be opened, is what this article all about. First up, we have to understand what is the importance of exercises. There is a wide agreement that is already present that when we engage in exercises, this will increase our immunity. The World Health Organization has also said about 30 minutes of this yoga or any of the exercises will obviously build the immunity. Yes, it is acceptable. Yes, it is also right. But the question is, do we have to go out into the gymnasium or to the yoga institutes to conduct these activities? That is where the question arises. Closed spaces with poor ventilation can also breed the viruses according to the article. The same has been taken into consideration with the help of certain examples. There was one of the cruise ship Diamond Princess, and you also have number of examples where certain churches in South Korea and in Singapore have been exposed to the closed spaces and the virus was able to spread immediately. So the question is, since gymnasiums and yoga institutes are and will happen in the closed spaces, the virus can spread massively. So the first important factor is closed spaces with poor ventilation, which can also be an example of gymnasium, will actually increase the virus infection. This spread in the closed places also increases, gets enhanced when the number of people in that region is comparatively on the greater level. So whenever we have more number of people within a closed area where the ventilation is comparatively less, this will also give rise rise to increase in the virus infection. When we hit the gyms, what we also have is increase in the exercises. So we also gasp for the air as well. So we inhale as well as exhale more when we are into exercise and its activity. What it also means is as we inhale and exhale, there could be certain droplets that will be released, and a person who is impacted or infected by it can also spread the virus as well. So deep breathing and exhalation can also make sure that in case there is a person who is infected by COVID-19, as he becomes asymptomatic, he can also spread this particular virus. How does the person spread the virus in a gymnasium? Let's suppose there is an asymptomatic person, or it can be a symptomatic person, but the person does not know he has COVID-19. He engages in his exercises and his activities. So as he continues with his activities, there could be a possibility where droplets fall on the surfaces, and ultimately this can contaminate the surface, and this surface can have the virus. So any other person who comes to conduct his exercises, in case he comes in contact with this surface, the spread of the virus can happen. Let's say there is a person who comes to take the dumbbells, or he puts on the weight to conduct his gymnasium activities. In all these cases, he comes in direct contact with the surfaces which is already infected by the virus, and as a result what we see is increase of the infection. There have been examples to substantiate the same as well. There were cases that were investigated from January 15th up until April 4 in Japan. All these cases prove that heavy breathing in close proximity, such as singing at karaoke parties, cheering at clubs, having conversations in bar, and also exercising in gymnasiums, have increased the number of infections in that particular case. So what are the measures that we can take? One of the measures that we can take is have a limit on number of people who come into a gymnasium for a particular period of time. So let's say for about 1 hour we will have about only 10 people, and if there is a possibility of increasing the ventilation in this particular area, the same provisions will also have to be implemented. And as we perform all these exercises, there could be a possibility that our masks that we wear can also get wet as well. The minute that happens, we will also have to change the mask. Is some of the precautionary measures that we can take to avoid the spread of infection. And at the same time, the management of the gym will also have to make sure that after every hour all these contact places are immediately sanitized with the help of the helpers. These are some of the measures that we can take up. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says 54 nations not doing enough to fight the slavery. There was a report released by Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative and anti-slavery organization Walk Free. This was released on the occasion of World Day Against Trafficking in Person. According to this particular report, about 40% of the people, the poor people, are presently in the Commonwealth countries, and these countries do not also have action plan to remove the slavery by the year 2030. In this particular backdrop, we have to understand what are the Commonwealth countries and what this report has for India. First up, what is the Commonwealth countries? All those countries which were previously the territories of the British Empire are called as Commonwealth countries. There are some exceptions, but most of the countries in the Commonwealth countries have been the territories of the British Empire. According to this report, India has not fared well when it comes to the implementation of poverty measures. Why? Because there is no single coordinating body. We have number of streams, number of departments, number of policy programs initiated, but there is no single coordinating agency to ultimately give a measure of what is the outcome of this poverty measure. It also brings into picture that India is not a signatory to International Labour Organization's Domestic Workers Convention. So what is this Domestic Workers Convention? According to it, most of the domestic workers work in the private households. So what do? As they work in these private households, they have no clear-cut rules of what their employment is. They have unregistered unemployment. They are also excluded from the legislation. So because they are excluded from the legislation, they have deplorable working conditions. Labor exploitation happens in these private households. Human right abuse continues to happen, and these are the major problems faced by the domestic workers. Why? Because there is lack of legal protection, and as a result these domestic workers face increased vulnerability and makes it very difficult for the domestic workers to seek any kind of help from law. As a result of all this, they also get very less number of wages. Why? Because there is no legislation that is backing, and as a result of all these initiatives, the Domestic Workers Convention basically provides all the basic labor rights that is required for the domestic workers. This may include a decent pay, the rest, and also entitlement of a minimum wage according to the Domestic Workers Convention. But according to this particular article, India is not ratified the International Labour Organization's 2011 Domestic Workers Convention, and at the same time India is also not part of 2014 Forced Labor Protocol. Kindly remember that it can be very important for your preliminary examination where India has not ratified the Domestic Workers Convention as well as the 2014 Forced Labor Control. When it comes to the forced marriage, it also says that one third of the Commonwealth countries had criminalized forced marriage while 23 had not criminalized commercial sexual exploitation of the children. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into some of the preliminary practice questions. With reference to the National Commission for Women, which of the following statements is or incorrect? It is an extra constitutional body. The Commission has no concrete legislative powers. It only has the powers to recommend amendments and submit reports which are not binding on state or union governments. Which of the statements are incorrect? It is asking for the incorrect statement. The answer to this is none. Why? Because both are correct. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. Kindly remember, this National Commission for Women is a statutory body which also happens to be an extra constitutional body. So anything which is not mentioned in the Constitution of India will become an extra constitutional body, since it is by an act of the Parliament under the National Commission for Women Act of 1990. It is also an extra constitutional body. Now let's look into the next practice question. Consider the following statements. India has ratified the Palermo Protocol of United Nations. Trafficking in persons report is released by Amnesty International to monitor and combat trafficking in persons. Which of the above statements is correct? It is asking for the correct statement, so the answer to this is one only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. The Palermo Protocol is a United Nations protocol to prevent, suppress, punish trafficking in human beings, especially women and children, supplementing the UN Convention against Transnational Organized Crime and its protocols. Kindly remember, India has ratified this particular protocol. The Trafficking in Persons report or TIP report is an annual report not by the Amnesty International, but it is issued by the US State Department's Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. It ranks governments based on their perceived efforts to acknowledge and combat human trafficking. Now let's look into the next practice question. Shahid Udham Singh is related to which of the following event in the Indian history? Opening fire at Michael Dwar, Surat Salt agitations, Kukka revolt, killing of British police officer John P. Saunders. The answer to this is opening fire at Michael Dwar. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of reference given under this article. Kindly remember, we have what is called as Jallianwala Bagh massacre. On 13th of April 1919, the day of Baisakhi festival, about 20,000 unarmed men, women and children gathered at Amritsar's Jallianwala Bagh. When the crowd gathered, they wanted to celebrate this festival. General Dayod arrived in this particular situation with his troops, sealed the only exit that was present in this particular park, and opened fire at all these innocents without any warning at this unarmed crowd. So while this was happening, Udham Singh, who happens to be a revolutionary freedom fighter, was just about 20 years of age as he witnessed this heinous crime. This incident had a clear mark on him, and he became a part of the armed resistance that was operating outside India, and that was in United States of America. We had one of the parties that was operating in United States of America, and that was in San Francisco, and that is called as Ghadar Party. This was one of the immigrant Punjabi Sikhs party where they wanted to secure India's independence. So what do? They started operating from United States of America, and they all aid India with funds to fight for the independence. In 1927, he was also influenced by Bhagat Singh. That is why he comes back to India. But the minute he comes back to India, the British immediately arrest him. Why? Because he was associated with the Gadar party, and as a result, after 4 years, he was released in 1931. He was under constant vigilance, but somehow he escapes himself and goes to Germany. And finally, he enters England in the year 1933. And after he enters England in 1933, he happens to open fire in 1940 against Michael Dorr in Caxton Hall in London. Why does he fire against this person? Because he was the governor when Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place, and that is why he is called as Shahid Udham Singh. Hats off to this great soul who was also a part of India's struggle for independence. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following countries border Vietnam? Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, China and Cambodia. The answer to this is 2, 4 and 5 only. Why? Because Thailand and Myanmar do not border Vietnam. Why have we taken this practice question? Because of the reference given under this article. So kindly remember, when it comes to bordering with Vietnam, we have Cambodia, Laos as well as China. So that is why the answer is 2, 4 and 5. Now let's look into the next practice question. Other than resistant to pests, what are the prospects for which genetically engineered plants have been created? To enable them to withstand drought, to increase the nutritive value of the produce, to enable them to grow and do photosynthesis in spaceships and space stations, to increase the shelf life. Select the correct answer using the code given below. The answer to this is 1, 2 and 4 only. Why? Because the third option is wrong, because it does not conduct any of the photosynthesis in spaceships or in space stations. Now let's look into the mains practice question. The position of the governors towards exercising their discretion has been considerably reduced. Explain the above statement with the help of judicial precedents. The new education policy, which looks beyond academics, is hamstrung by multiple challenges. Comment. So please write all your answers on the comment section. Peer review, come up with constructive criticism. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.